Hello, and welcome to Speak Honest. I am your host and certified relationship coach, Jennifer Noble. It has been my passion for over a decade to help women like you heal what's been holding you back from having the relationships you deserve. Are you struggling with a relationship where you can't seem to voice your emotions, needs, and boundaries without having it blow up in your face? Then you have found the right podcast, my friend. Get ready for practical tips, empowering truths, and honest conversations. Now, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Speak Honest. On today's podcast, I am actually going to be speaking with a guest, Chelsea Ohlemiller. Chelsea is a wife, a mother, also an educator, and she has roots in Indiana, and she has a passionate spirit. Chelsea is a self-proclaimed sappy romantic, coffee junkie, book collector, and a person who wears her heart on her sleeve. She is sarcastic, full of jokes and tears, and enjoys writing most when life gets messy or complicated. I think we can all appreciate that. And in 2017, Chelsea's mother passed away. But it was through her grief journey that she's decided to take her mother's advice and share her writing with the world. And so one day she gained the courage to honor her mother's wishes and write that book. And it turned out to be one of the best decisions she's ever made. And that is why she is on the podcast here today. Chelsea, thank you so much for coming on here. I would love to know more about your book that you just wrote and released.
Thank you so much first for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation today. And yeah, so my book, Now That She's Gone, came about because just like you said, in 2017, I lost my mother. She was only 57. And I was in my 30s and, dealing with friends that still had grandparents, and nobody around me really knew what to say or do. And just, it was very unexpected. And so I just kind of found myself in a life that I didn't know what was going to happen next. And I didn't know what my future looked like anymore. I thought I would have my mother for many more years, and that changed. So I started writing originally in the grief process just to heal and as a therapeutic response, and ended up sharing it on some platforms and hearing from women that said, I feel the same way. I feel so seen and understood. And why is nobody talking about this? And so that kind of gave me the courage to just continue sharing my heart with the world. And it led to where I am today, which is hopefully helping others through their own grief process and just seeing that, there's so much beauty in what remains.
Oh, I think that's so lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, your book, it's called, again, you said, Now That She's Gone. Oof, it's such a beautiful title, by the way, because it just really hits me like right in the heart.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit more about what's in the book. What can people expect out of it when they pick it up?
So the best thing about this book is that it's there when you need it. So some people might need this immediately when their mother passes, and some people might need this years later. Everything looks different for each person. But the other part about it is that I wanted it to be read as a take what you need when you need it. So this is not a book that needs to be read from the front cover to the back cover. It's a book that is in sections, not chapters. So you kind of can experience the book however you want. If you want it to start from the beginning and go to the end, great. If not, and you want to skip to the holidays section or the faith section or, the very beginning of grief and what that healing process looks like, you can kind of pick and choose what you need and use it how you see. And so that's what I love the most about the book, because grief is so messy and it's just this web and labyrinth of things and experiences. Even just reading a book can be hard. Even just folding laundry can be hard. And so I wanted this to be something that was beautiful and easy, and just not even that you just read it once, but you can keep coming back to it and feel seen and understood and just cherished in these moments that are so, so hard.
I think that's so great, because if there's one thing I've ever learned, it's that grief is not linear. And so even in my own grief, if exactly 10 years ago, I lost my dad unexpectedly. He was 64 and I thought that was young. So 57 is rough, right? Those ages when I hadn't even turned 30 yet. And so it was just one of those like, well, I thought I'd have my dad at least for 10 or 20 more years. And that grief, it wasn't linear. It wasn't like, oh, hey, here's your process. Here's where you go through. First, you'll hit denial and then anger, whatever it is that they always tell us that we go through. So I really like to hear that your book is more of a process. People can kind of pick it up and do whatever. Now, let me ask you this, though, Chelsea, because it sounds like you really loved your mom.
Yes.
Right? Like you guys had a great relationship. I mean, I'm not assuming, but it's, if you're going to write a book about your mother and how much you love her and you miss her, that's beautiful and that's wonderful. The majority of my listeners did not have that, unfortunately. And I know I'm actually thinking of a couple clients that I know of who have lost their mother, but wasn't able to have that reconciliation before she passed away. And so I was wondering, do you have any takes on this? Like what happens when your mother passes away, or if you have this relationship with your mother and it's not quite where you want it to go?
I'm so glad that you bring that up because, like you said, I had a wonderful relationship with my mother. We were very close. I was very blessed to have that relationship. And I know that not everybody is. And so I did not want this book to be for just women like me, that had this great relationship. And so through talking with so many readers and friends and having that intimate experience with other women that have that different experience, my book in each chapter in each section, there's an essay that is just called When It's Complicated. And it's for women that, might have had hypercritical mothers or non-existent mothers or mothers who, struggled with addiction or anything that's complicated, anything that made that relationship less than ideal in their hearts and in their minds. And so each of those essays I wrote, but through the experience of talking with all of these women like you're describing. And so I wanted it to be a book for all of us. I wanted you to be able to pick it up, no matter if you had a wonderful relationship or a difficult one, and still find that hope and that, vulnerability and truth, and honor those stories as much as my own. And I always tell those women, because there's a lot of my friends even that, like that you're speaking of clients, I even have friends that stopped talking about their moms to me because they did have a complicated relationship. And they said, well, I can't complain about my mom and gripe about her because you don't have yours. And I said, yes, you can. So I always tell women, still talk about your mothers, still be very open and honest about your situation, because that's the friend that I fell in love with. That's the friend that I admire. And I don't want you to change yourself just for me. And oftentimes I think that those women are grieving their mothers kind of dual and before and after, grieving a mom that they wanted, that they might not have had. And then once that mother is gone, then you grieve again because you grieve the mother that you're never going to have.
Oh yeah, let's dive into that if you don't mind. What I'm hearing you say is there can be two griefs. There can be the grief of losing your mother, your biological mother, the woman who gave birth to you or that adopted you, the person who is your mother. And then for those of us that had a complicated relationship with our mother, there's a different type of grief. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, there's that grief of what I didn't have that I wanted.
What I didn't have that I wanted. What I didn't have that like we deserved to an extent.
Oh, yes. That you were worthy of. Yes. Yeah. That you should have. Yeah, absolutely.
As a lot what I do with my clients is attachment-based coaching. And so attachment styles comes from the concept of how we were raised as children with our primary caregivers. So essentially mothers. And so for a lot of us that are struggling in our relationships today with our romantic partners because we don't think we're good enough, or we think we're a burden, or we think we're worthless, a lot of this stems back from our parents, unfortunately. And so hearing this idea of just grief in general can come up because you have to grieve the relationship with your mother that you didn't get.
Right.
Even if she is still alive. Is that true too? Is that the case?
Oh, 100%. 100%. And I think then you might be constantly grieving, where a woman like me is constantly missing. I think a woman like that is constantly grieving and will forever, And I think it also ties back to the legacy component. I honor my mother's legacy, and it's very important to me to do something purposeful with that. But also, a woman with a complicated relationship would also have a legacy, but just one she doesn't want to replicate, one she wants to create herself. And so I think that's such an important distinction. When we talk about legacies, and I talk about it a lot in my book, I'm my mother's legacy, and you might be your mother's legacy too, but one you're not replicating, one that you're changing, you're crafting.
Oh yeah. For you breaking.
Yes.
Yeah. Cause like there was almost a bit of a hint of like, oh, you are your mother's legacy. And I felt this feeling in my stomach that almost was kind of like, no, right? Like that vibe, that somatic process that just kind of wanted to push against that real quick. It's like, no, I'm doing different now, right? I'm making changes. I'm not going to be the same.
Exactly.
And it's fascinating how that can just kind of come up that fast. And fascinatingly enough, I actually have a pretty decent relationship with my mother now. We've been through a lot of healing together and throughout all of this process. But at the time when I was younger, not so much. And so there's even times in there where I just had to grieve. Why couldn't I have her there? Why couldn't I have whoever this woman is right now? Where was she when I was little?
Oh, yes.
You know, so there's sometimes the grief of that as well, but the blessing of being able to work through some of that. Cause I know not a lot of people get that.
Yeah. And you said it so beautifully, you're healing together and not everybody gets that opportunity. And so I think that that's a beautiful thing if you can. But then what happens is if you can't heal together or even heal separately and you get to the end of your mother's life and you didn't get that opportunity, sometimes people sit at the deathbed of their mom and want all of these years of trauma and heartbreak to be healed. And that's just not a thing that we're capable of. It's just not a possibility. You can't take 30 years of a relationship, whether it was good or bad, and reconcile it into minutes
when they are even struggling or something's going on. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So no, I think that it brings up such a good point. And also at the same time, it's normal, isn't it? It's normal to want to almost feel that urgency because they're almost at the end of their life. And it's like, oh my God, I need to heal this stuff because I can't have any closure if they're gone.
Right. And I always tell people, like, what is normal? Because that's the first everybody says, is this normal in grief? Is this normal in grief? And I always say, this is really common in grief, but there is no normal grief.
Ooh, I love that. It's common, but it's like there is no normal, but the word common is great. Yeah, this happens.
Yes, it happens. You will find other people that are definitely living this or something similar, but I don't know what normal is in grief because it shatters things that you thought were completely capable of withstanding any storm. And it rebuilds with pieces you didn't even know you had. And so there's just really no normal.
Oh, I love that. Now you talk a lot about grief and I know it stems mainly because of the loss of your mother, but it sounds like you also have a really amazing understanding of grief in general, correct?
Yeah, I think that when you sit and watch the final breaths of anyone, but for me, it was the woman that created me. I've always been an empath, but this really ignited that part of my heart. And it also just reminded me the extreme fragility of life. And I think after you hold a profound loss, it changes you. And some things aren't always for the better, like the anxiousness and the fear, but there are things that changed me for the better. And I think that's my capability of just recognizing people's aches and heartbreaks and things that they try to hide from the world that I recognize in their eyes before they say anything. And so I do think there are parts of grief that make people have superpowers of just holding other people's heartbreak too. And I tell people all the time, not everybody's worthy of witnessing your grief, whether that's living grief, whether that's the grief of someone that's passed, whether that's grieving a relationship or a job that you lost. I mean, grief is not tied to only the loss of a loved one. And I always say to people, you have to meet yourself where you are because you don't know what it looks like from day to day. I mean, it's an experience that until you know, you don't know.
I would love to touch on something that you just brought up there because I think this is really important, is that grief of a relationship. And I know a lot of people almost kind of dismiss their pain and will almost just be like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, right? It's not like he died. It's not like your mother, or it's not like your husband passed away or something. We just broke up. I don't deserve to be grieving. This isn't grief. I'm just sad. And I try to explain to them, like no, heartbreak is a grief in and of itself. It's a loss. You have lost someone that you love. And in fact, in some situations that can feel hard because they're still there. And you actually have to see them go off and maybe even get in a different relationship. And that's going to bring up a whole other host of stories of like, well, was I not good enough? Was I not pretty enough? Like, did I not shower him with enough love? Was there something else I could have been doing? So all of these stories mixed in with this grief. What would you say to someone who has lost a relationship and they are grieving? How can we encourage them to be okay with that?
Well, first, I think you need to one, there's no scale of grief. There's no comparison. And the relationship that you're speaking of, that is absolutely grief. And sometimes, I'm not going to say it's harder, but it's different in that while I lost somebody that is no longer here, so I cannot have any more memories, you've lost somebody that's still walking around with the capability to make memories, but it's just not with you. And so that absolutely is grief. That is heartbreak. And in some ways, it's just at the end of the spectrum of losing someone who's living and losing someone who has died. And I actually just read a book. It's called The Last Love Note. And it speaks about a lot of these things. It's a fiction book. It's a novel, but it's beautiful. And it just speaks of those kinds of losses of what would happen if you lose somebody that just walked away.
Yeah. And do you have any tips for how to grieve? Is that anything that you ever get into in terms of like, what do we do if we're devastated? We've just lost this relationship. All I want to do is, I remember for me when when I broke up with, when I was broken up with, when he broke up with me, when he left me 4 years ago during the pandemic. And I just numbed myself completely. It was nightly ice creams with bottles of wine, White Claw, chocolate, weed, anything I could get my hands on to just stop feeling. I didn't want to feel anymore. Do you have any recommendations, advice, guidance for women going through any sort of loss? Like, how can they really get through it? What can they do? Is it just inevitable? Will it just suck forever? Stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the first thing is safety is the most important. So you have to have your safe space, you have to have your safe activities, and you have to have your safe people. And so those are three critical things that you have to have. And, if for a while you want to just sit in your pajamas and eat ice cream, and that's okay, but don't stay there. And so that's my biggest advice is wherever you find yourself, it's okay. Acknowledge that space, but don't stay there. Keep going. It's a journey. It's not a marathon, and it's not a place to be stagnant. It's not a destination. And so really you just have to keep moving. And I think the biggest thing that helped me was just to find something that I loved, that was safe, that was healthy, that took me out of the pain for a while, even if that was for 5 minutes. And for some people, that's Pilates. For some people, that's reading. For some people, that's just sitting by the water and listening to the waves. So I think just finding what works for you, and even things that don't work for you, just don't stay there.
Just don't stay there. Yeah.
Don't let yourself stay in any space for too long.
As you're talking, I'm kind of thinking about, how would I walk my clients through this? And so I'm thinking, okay, so if on week 1, you're just numbing out completely, great. You know what? We're humans. It happens. And then maybe
but don't be there on week 2.
Yeah. Then maybe by week 2, the way you're numbing is more so you're binging something on Netflix. Great. You've at least shifted,
yes.
Right? You've at least shifted where you're numbing. And that's all we want to kind of keep doing is don't get stuck in one habit for too long, because then it actually becomes something that you're going to get stuck in for ages.
Absolutely.
And it's a lot harder to shift out of. So I've even made this joke with some people before, which is like, listen, if your vice right now is wine, I just want you to shift over to beer or something. We need to get your brain to get out of that habit space. And I'm not asking you to get rid of it completely yet.
Right.
But stuff like that, right? Is stuff like that kind of helpful for people just to keep shifting, keep moving, keep going?
Yes. And that's why I say don't stay there, because habits become routines.
Habits become routines. Yes. I love that.
And then once you have a routine, then you're talking about brain chemistry and things that are way beyond my control. But yes, that's why I always say you have to you're moving forward. You're not moving on. And I think that's important for people to realize is that I'm going to keep stepping forward, but also I'm going to be carrying this with me, kind of like a backpack of my grief is going to go with me. It's just a different part of me, like a new skin almost. And so whether you're carrying the grief of a relationship or, the loss of a job or, the loss of a parent, whatever that is, you're going to be carrying it with you and you're going to keep walking with it. And so, yeah, just don't stay there because like I said, I think in my opinion, I think habits always become routines if you stay there too long, and then that can get dangerous, you know?
It's so hard to get out of a routine. I love how you said that though with the bad habit, because of the routine. It's almost like, it's almost like a bad routine then, which I don't like to put judgment on things, but I hear what you're saying.
Right. Unhealthy or unsafe,
Yeah, exactly. I loved how you said, we're moving forward, we're not moving on. And something about that really resonated in me, because I know for myself, it was really hard to think that I could have fun again, that I could laugh with my mom again, after my dad passed away or something, that I could go on. It was so hard for me. Even just last year, I got remarried, and just the idea of, oh, he doesn't even know who my husband is now. What a wild thought process in my mind that this is happening. But I love how you said, we're just moving forward. We're not moving on. The people who were once a part of our hearts will always be there. Even in a relationship, even if it was terrible, even if it was toxic and traumatic, that person has shaped us forever, haven't they?
Forever. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's okay to hold on to that.
Absolutely.
It's just about figuring out ways to honor that love as opposed to letting it kind of take you down. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. And that's why it's so hurtful when people say things like, haven't you moved on yet? Aren't you over this? And it's like,
yeah.
Well, wait a minute. I don't think this is not a hill or a mountain. I'm never going to get over. It's kind of a before and an after, really. It's a timeline before the loss, after the loss, and that's why it's so uncomfortable when people say all those platitudes, that go into that is, you're not going to just get over it. You're not going to move on. And somebody once said to me is, oh, you look like you've bounced back. And I was like, actually, and I wrote a whole piece on it because I was like, actually, no, in grief, what I'm doing, I'm constantly bouncing back and forth and back and forth. And that's what healing is. You're going to have moments of joy and you're going to have moments of sadness. You're going to have moments of guilt because you had moments of joy, and so it's just a constant bouncing between emotions. And a lot of times what people don't realize is that in grief, you're always two contradictory things, and that's okay. You can be happy and also full of sorrow because someone's there. You can be full of amazing emotions, but also emptiness for who isn't there, who isn't present in your life. And so I think accepting that contradiction that's going to stay with you is the first step to understanding, okay, it's okay to walk forward because I'm going to always be both.
Oh, that's a stunning thing right there, to hold space for both big feelings that are coming up. Both that hey, I'm having this happy moment right here. Oh, and then there's a sadness because they're not with me. And I think a lot of people don't understand that we can live in that and.
Yes.
We can live in both of those feelings at the exact same time. We can honor the loved one by really still feeling for them and still have a great time and still move on. Not move on. See, look what I just did there. But, move forward.
Yes.
And doing that. And that's why it's so important. Our language is so important, though, when we talk to people like this, not throwing those toxic positivity platitudes out to them or all of these things like, oh, it happened for a reason, or, they're in a better place, or, all of these kind of things. I just remember all of those in the moment. And I was just like, I couldn't stand them in the moment. I was like, just shut up and leave me alone.
Right.
Yeah. So it's good to be mindful of our language with people, to be able to help them in ways that works for them, and really just letting them process how they need to. So let me ask you this real quick. If someone knows someone in their life that's grieving, I think it can sometimes be quite difficult to know what to do. And I know for myself, because I am a self-professed, oh, I love hard, I love deep, I love all this stuff, which is really just another way of saying I attach a lot. And I know a lot of my listeners are like that as well. And so here we are, we want to do all this stuff for people all the time, right? We're like, oh, we'll cook for you and we'll bring you food and we want to love you and rub your feet. I don't know. But not everyone always needs that. So what's the best way to really be there for someone who's grieving?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you have to stay yourself. If you're the funny friend, still be the funny friend. If you're the baker, bake. If you're, the person that takes them shopping, take them shopping. I think the first thing is just stay true to yourself, because that's the friend that they know. And everything else has already changed. So they don't want another change. Stay who you are. And then the next thing is just, I always say to people, I'm here however you need me. And I'm going to keep reminding you that, because most people don't ask for help. So if it's a friend, that you say, I'm going to show up into your laundry, or I'm going to drop off groceries, you kind of know somebody enough to know, do they want you to sit with them in this, or do they want you to drop it off and just show that you care? And so just really finding out how you can help. And if you don't know, do something. Just keep showing up. But the best thing is those first few weeks of loss, whether it's a breakup or a loss of a loved one, there's so many people there and it's crazy and it's busy, but then everybody disappears, month 1, month 2, month 3, people forget about it and they move on, and they can move on because that's what their life is demanding of them. And everybody has responsibilities, but keep checking back in, even if it's just a text once a week. I'm here for you. I'm just reminding you. Or even if it's a call, keep calling. I don't expect you to answer, but I'm going to keep calling until you need me, and just keep showing up for them and letting them decide, nothing where you're being pushy or here's what we're doing, but just I'm here for you however you need me.
Yeah. And if the person isn't able to receive that, if you're calling, and they're like, it's fine, or if they're not texting you back or something like that, don't take it personally.
Absolutely.
So sometimes it can be quite hard, especially for those of us with these attachment wounds, right? We go towards someone, we want to help them. And then essentially, if we feel rejected to an extent, just understand like that person is going through a lot. They might even think like, oh yes, this is what I need. And then the moment you show up, they don't want you there anymore.
Right.
You got to roll with it.
Yes.
You just got to really be okay with just allowing them to process this how they need to.
Yes. And I always say like space is okay. But what you can do is if somebody is really distancing themselves, it's okay just to send a text and say, I'm just a little concerned. Can you just give me a thumbs up emoji that you're okay? And I'll let you go. I
That's
just need
beautiful.
something, just that little check-in. Because another thing that a lot of grieving people need is just, they need the space. They want to be alone. They need to sit with this new reality, whatever that reality is for them. And they have to have time to comprehend that. And sometimes that's immediate and sometimes that's a year later. But there will be a time where they have to sit with it themselves and comprehend it. And I don't always say accept because I'm not for sure if you ever really accept that somebody is gone.
But comprehend. I love how you said that. Yes.
Yes, you have to comprehend because that's your truth. That is your reality and it cannot be changed. And so we have to understand that. And only when we understand that can we truly then work to heal like a scar, not like a wound that will heal completely, because we're going to, still see it years and years down the road.
It's a wound that, it cut us deep, right? So
yes.
It's going to heal up, but we're always going to see it. It's always going to be there. It might even always affect us, right? It might be numb. Maybe it's sensitive to the touch, or maybe it's a little bit unsightly. Who knows? Who cares? But it's now part of us, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's just like, okay, this is who we are. But I love what you're saying in terms of the time frame. I want to go back to that real quick because this is huge. And I remember this when my dad passed away. Everyone was there for like the first 6 months. Everyone always there. We did have a couple of those kind of incidences, of family members that don't quite understand boundaries and they got upset, when we didn't want anything from them. And that's where I'm trying to say, like, don't be like that, please.
Right.
Like if you're trying to offer help and the person grieving says no, like, please don't make it about you. Like if there's just one thing I could ask, just understand that the person's grieving. But then year 2 started coming in. So for my dad, he passed away in 2014. So all of a sudden we're rolling into 2015. All of 2015, it was like no one acknowledged it. No one even talked about it. No one asked for anything. And honestly, though, that year just felt harder than any of the year previously. Is that anything you notice?
Oh, yes. It's a loneliness because you feel like the people that you thought would be there in the midst of your heartbreak are absent too. So then it's a lot of little losses of things and other people. And I think it's such a beautiful thing, the way grief can reveal who your true people are. Because my mom passed away in 2017 and I still have 4 to 5 friends that text me every year on her birthday, every year on the date of her death anniversary. And it is not the friends that I thought it would be. And that's okay. But who your people are that will sit with you in your light as much as you're dark. And that's a powerful lesson to learn.
Yeah, I love that. You said they'll sit with you in your light as much as your dark. That's really, really beautiful. I love that so much. Okay, so we've talked about a lot here. I love it so much. Thank you so much for sharing your vulnerability with losing your mother. Even right now, I kind of want to say I'm so sorry for your loss. Actually, let me just like chime in for another question, if you don't mind. Could you give me any tips for like how to say that better to someone? Because on the one hand, I want to always say like, I'm so sorry for your loss. And on the other hand, I hate saying that because it just doesn't ever feel right. Or I hated it when people said it to me. And so I don't know if you have any thought processes there. Like, what do you say?
Yeah, I think the first thing is there are things that sting for grieving hearts. There really are, words and phrases. But I try when someone says, I'm sorry for your loss, at least they're acknowledging it. And I try to give these people grace because most of the time, the people that say the things that hurt a little bit are the people that don't know grief yet. And I think if you don't know, I don't want you to know because I know what this feels like, and that's okay. I would rather you stay in the naive space and not know the exact right thing to say if it means you don't have to know this pain too.
Wow.
So I try to give grace. And also, I think it's okay to say, I'm sorry about your loss. For me, I always just say, I'm lifting you in so much light and comfort and love, or whatever that may be. I'm lifting you in encouragement as I know that you're navigating this heartbreak. Or, I think anything that you say, if you really say it from a place of vulnerability and compassion, there's not a wrong thing to say if that's where you're coming from. And if you truly mean it.
You're such a kind and compassionate person. I think that's why. I think that's really, no, I love that though for you so much. I was like, I'm trying to think. I was like, oh, you're so much better than I am. People used to say that, like, sorry for your loss. And I'd be like, shut up. Like, I'm very feisty.
It did sting at first. I wrote a whole piece on it, actually, like, cool. My mother's not lost. I said, my mother is not lost. Like, she is deceased. She has died, but she is not lost.
Ooh.
But I wrote that when I was mad. I was in the anger stage of grief and I was like, who are you to say, the same kind of thing. Like, my mom's in a better place. It's like,
yeah.
Okay, well, that place, that's wonderful. But also I want her to be here. Like, I don't care where she is.
Yeah. She might be in a better place. I'm in a worse place. And now I'm pissed off.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I had all those feelings. Trust me, there was rage, there was anger. But because I've had the time, it's been 7 years. And so in those 7 years, like I said, I learned that the people that said those things were naive to grief. They didn't know it yet. And so I thought, well, how can I didn't know it because guess what? I'm sure I said those same things too.
Yeah.
And I did that because I didn't know, but I meant them. Just think about how when you showed up and said those things, you were saying them from your heart. You were wholeheartedly saying, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm here for you. And so I try to remember that,
I love how you said, what a blessing that almost they have the naivety to not know what to say kind of thing. And I thought that kind of hit close to my heart of like, oh yeah, that makes a lot. It's probably why I try so hard now to try to say a better thing. Cause it's like, I remember what that feeling felt like. I remember what it was like to just get really pissed off at people. And it's like, I just at the time just wanted people to be like, dude, that sucks. And then that's just me. And the important part too is to be authentic to who you are when you're helping someone through their grief. Because if you are constantly trying to figure out what they need, you're going to wrap yourself in circles because they don't even know what they need half the time. Like, we're grieving. We don't know what we need. We don't know what we want. You mentioned this concept of like, you've had 7 years. And this is something that I kind of developed in my own headspace. My mom used to really get pissed off at the phrase, time heals all things. And she'd be reading all of her little grief books and she would just like read halfway through and then be like, F this book, because it said something that she like hated again. And I remember talking to her and I was like, well, Mom, I agree with you. Time does not heal all things, but it does take time to heal.
Yes.
And so don't rush the process. Don't think that it's year 2, you have to be better. Don't think it's year 5, you have to be over him. In that regards, even now, she's in a beautiful relationship now with someone. And even now, sometimes she's thinking, is this okay? Am I cheating on him? Like, right. Is he going to be okay with this? And I was like, Dad, be fine. That's fine. Don't worry. Like, you should be happy. But all of those things are very normal and they're very okay.
Oh, yes.
In order to just kind of process whatever it is that you have to go through, right?
Yeah. You should tell your mom this because people said that to me all the time. Time heals, time heals. And I said, I have a quote on my website, actually. It says, time does heal, but it doesn't heal you completely. Time simply changes your perspective. So you see more reminiscence than loss. You see more memories than death. or heartbreak, whatever that is. And so I think the better phrase is that time changes your perspective.
Love that. Time changes your perspective. All right. With that, I think that's a beautiful spot to wrap up with right there. Time changes your perspective. Now, Chelsea, tell us about how people can find out more about you.
So my website is www.hopeandharshrealities.com. And then I'm on all social media at Hope and Harsh Realities. And then my book, Now That She's Gone, is available at all major retailers, anywhere that you can buy books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, all of those places.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So people can go on Amazon right now. They can pick up your book. And because it's not a linear book, this is just something that they can use in any space of their heartache. And that heartache could be from the loss of a loved one to death. It could be the loss of a relationship to a breakup. It could even just be wanting to grieve the relationship with your mom or dad you never had. And so grab Chelsea's book, work through the stuff, work through her essays where she talks about, the complicated parts. I think those are going to help a lot of people. And thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with me. And your vulnerability and openness to talk about this is needed in the world. We need to be talking about this more, not hiding it.
Yes.
So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You have been a joy, and I hope we can do this again.
Absolutely. I would absolutely love that. All right. Well, you take care and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Wow, what a beautiful episode with Chelsea. I loved that I was able to have her come on and talk to all of you about grief. Because grief isn't just about death, right? It's about the loss of a loved one. One of my favorite quotes that I heard a long time ago is that grief is just all of the love that we have with nowhere for it to go. So if you've lost a loved one in a breakup or a divorce or a separation or a death, or a move, it doesn't matter. If you have a bunch of love for someone, but you can't give it to them because they're not here anymore, that's grief. And I want you to really take the time to honor that. So again, thank you to Chelsea for coming on. Everyone, please go and grab her book if you are able to. Now That She's Gone, it is just an amazing book. You're going to love it. And if you would like to get any more help with your grief, I would love to have you on the podcast. Not only do I host guests on the podcast and talk to them about all the different variations of healing and about loving and about relationships, but in addition to that, I bring on clients for a free coaching call. So if you're out there right now and you're thinking, wow, I'm really dealing with a relationship issue. I am dealing with a heartbreak, Jen, and I don't know where to go. I'm shoving myself full of wine and vodka every night, or I'm just crying all the time, or I can't get them out of my mind and my work is suffering. Reach out to me. Let's get on the podcast together. Let's talk about this. Let's have a coaching call where I can help you one-to-one work through the situation that you're struggling with, because you don't need to struggle alone. That's what we're here for. And by you coming on the podcast and talking about your situation, you are actually helping other women. In fact, if you go back and listen to some of the previous episodes, you're going to find other coaching calls that I have with other women on the podcast. If you are getting something out of those calls, imagine how much someone might get something out of your story. Come on, be vulnerable, tell your story, get some help that you need. And listen, we do aliases here. Rarely is anyone's name actually what it is on the podcast. So if you're worried about someone finding you or about telling your story, everything is completely confidential. I never use your real name. We change the name of everyone else. Everything is safe. I would love to have you on the podcast if that is something you're interested in. If you are interested, you can reach out to me in my email, jennifer@speak-honest.com, or there's a link to go ahead and just schedule now. You can go ahead and just click on that link right now and you go to a calendar and you can schedule in a time with me to talk right away. We'll get to know each other first a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and hit record and we'll do a coaching session together. But everything is for you. I want you to get the help that you need. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast today, and I will talk to you next week. Take care. As we wrap up today's conversation, always remember that healing is a journey, not a destination. And it is an honor to be a part of your healing journey. If you want to dig deeper into the topics we covered today, be sure to head over to our show notes where you can find all of the valuable information mentioned in today's episode right there. And please remember to rate, review, and subscribe if you enjoyed today's podcast. Your feedback means the world to us and helps others discover our podcast. Until next time, remember to speak up and speak honest.